All right, g'day everyone. Welcome to the Energeia podcast. This is Dr. G, and today I'm speaking with Jeohanna Martinez Bigles. Jeohanna is the founder and owner of Living Your Ikigai, a boutique coaching and consulting firm focused on unlocking individual team and organizational potential through a strengths-based approach. She has 20 years of experience in roles throughout human services, social services, special education, as well as serving as an Air Force civilian in the United Kingdom and Pentagon, through to more recent corporate work in learning and organization development, leadership development, and executive coaching. Jeohanna is an associate certified coach within the International Coaching Federation and has led several change initiatives focused on empowering individuals, creating inclusive teams and experiences, and elevating the strengths of organizations. She also graduated recently with a master's degree in positive organizational development and change from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, my own grad school alma mater, and a program I was fortunate enough to coach in myself for a time. And she is also an experienced Zumba instructor with 9 years of experience under her belt in getting people fit and active through the athletic magic of dance. Jeohanna, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm really excited to be here and to connect and to have a really great conversation on different things. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it. And perhaps we could start with the namesake of your firm, Ikigai, and living your Ikigai. I've come across this concept enough in my own career, but for listeners who are unfamiliar with this idea, could you outline what you view as the important broad strokes of Ikigai, and how do you implement its principles in the work that you do as a coach and consultant?
Awesome question. Thank you. So with ikigai, it's a Japanese word, and so it stands for, your reason for being. So in terms of, I could go deep into the origins, but I like to refer more to the book that was written by, I should know this. But it'll come to me. It'll come to me in the name of the book. Nonetheless, it is focused on helping people. So for me, the way I understand ikigai, it's not just solely about finding that one magical thing that's your quote unquote purpose or passion in life. It's not a singular thing. It's more about creating a life where on a daily basis, you're actually able to find something that you find joyful or meaningful or purposeful. So, whether it's going into like what they call a state of flow, which is really where you're using your strengths and doing something that it just naturally comes to you. So for me, it's something like I'm in this place of thinking, strategic thinking, let's say, or planning, and then I'm listening to music in the background. And so it's like the music, the thinking, all this ideation that's happening, that's sort of like my state of flow. So when I'm in that state of flow, that to me is ikigai. It's where I get my inspiration. It's where I'm inspired to develop either ideas or solutions for an individual, let's say a coaching client or a team that I'm working with or consulting on, different like team dynamic matters. And that's essentially where I find that joy. So what I try to do for individuals is help them to figure out what that looks like. Is it a matter of daily activities, or is it a matter of combining things where it's finding something that they enjoy at work and on the personal side? So is it marrying the two and seeing, well, where can that happy medium be so that they can actually create it for themselves on a daily basis, not just base it on like a tangible outcome, like, oh, well, I was able to achieve XYZ, therefore I'm living my ikigai now because I'm getting paid to do it and I love it and whatnot. So in the business world, it's used a lot in terms of helping people to find their passion, find what they're good at, what is their gift that they want to share with the world and get paid for it, sort of thing. But I feel like it's a little bit deeper. It's not just sort of these tick the boxes and say, all right, I found what my ikigai is and I'm going to live it. It really is about the intentionality behind it, and then being intentional with how you want to do it, what it looks like, and the individualistic aspect of it. It's not going to be like a cookie cutter version for everyone. So that's where I think it's most exciting to help individuals, teams, and organizations find that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the contrast with the cookie cutter approach, because I see this a lot in my own work, that people almost see their professional life and their personal life operating on parallel tracks, and to the degree that they converge, they only converge sort of incidentally or by happenstance, not because there's any sort of convergent purpose between the two. And, you know, a lot of the time when we see ikigai and the concept represented visually, we see it as these like overlapping circles within a Venn diagram with, you know, your ikigai or, you know, centrality of purpose right in the middle. And that's very different. I mean, maybe just a simple visual representation, but I think most people spend a lot of their lives assuming that they can't, or that it's difficult to find that center of the Venn diagram, and that the most profitable approach to their life is to have these parallel tracks, these, you know, conceptual bright lines that exist between, you know, your personal life on one hand, your professional life on the other. And, you know, I just found in my own experience as a coach, the people who try and establish some sort of consilience or convergence between the two are the people who have the greatest sustainability, both as a person and as a professional, when it comes to sort of getting day-to-day joy and fulfillment. Is that sort of been your experience with many of your clients as well?
Absolutely. So in terms of helping them realize that you can't separate, like they say, the head and the heart, right? You can't separate the two and say all of a sudden, well, I'm going to be logical about everything, so I'm going to remove all my emotions, all the heart from every decision I make and just be logical. It's not sustainable long term. So that's sort of where I also feel that it is sort of this convergence. It is, well, how do we strike the balance between what you value, what's important to you, but also how you want to show up in the world? So whether it's at work, whether it's at play, or whether it's in your family life, where do they all come together? What's the core? And so at the core of who you are as a professional, as an individual, what is so core to you that it just, you can't shake it, you know? And then creating the opportunity, or actually creating that life that where it does come together and you feel that balance and you feel that peace and that alignment that comes with knowing that you're showing up as you are and who you are, but you're also honoring the values that you have and the things that align to the purpose that you see for yourself and the values.
Yeah, and the important, I think, aspect of all of that is that while we can understand this conceptually, the important part of this, it's embodied in the name of your firm, living your ikigai. It's an experiential thing much more than it is a conceptual thing. People know it in their bones when it's all come together. No one is going to suggest that even if you establish what that center of the overlapping Venn, the overlapping circles in the Venn diagram is, no one's expecting that you're going to be able to maintain that in a way that is fully consistent every single day, day in, day out. I mean, life gets in the way. That's where we would like to aspire to. Don't get me wrong. We would like to aspire in that direction. But I think for a lot of people, if you take an experiential lens towards this and sort of recognize that while not every day is going to be the same, and you are going to fluctuate in terms of like how much you live your ikigai, how much you feel it every day, when you do feel it, you know it. You absolutely know. You know when everything's coming together. You know when you're doing the right thing in your career. You know when you've done all the right things before getting up in the morning and going to work. You know when you're living your values. And I think a lot of the time. And you know when you're living in a way where you're pursuing your vision. I think for me, a lot of the time when I have new clients come to me, it's because they don't get that feeling much or at all, right? They again just feel like, okay, I'm content with work, I'm content with life, but I never go through this sort of like pulsate. You mentioned flow before, right? They never have this kind of experiential flow state where they're just kind of like, hell yeah, I'm on the ride of my own life and loving the ride of my own life and really in the throes of this, this experiential optimization of self. So how do we get people past the conceptual and through to the experiential when it comes to the idea of living your ikigai?
So I also equate it to a feeling of feeling alive. And a lot of times I think you brought up a really valid point around conceptually, it perhaps sounds like, yeah, it makes total sense. However, what I've realized is that the experiential part, right? And even when I think about, for example, when I have coached leaders and when I'm coaching leaders and they're telling me, I just feel like I'm just kind of going through the motions. I don't feel like I'm really doing what I want to be doing. So there's a lot of action that backs up the feeling of, well, how do you feel alive? What is it that you're doing? And so it's through those questions and the curiosity that is required for an individual to then check in with themselves and say, wait a second, I may be going through the motions here because I'm quote unquote successful. So I hold an executive role. I've done all these things. So why don't I feel excited? Why don't I feel present and like I'm in those everyday interactions as a leader? So what I've been able to glean just from coaching individuals too is that, okay, well, when is it that you are feeling that moment of you're feeling alive? And in feeling alive, what is happening internally? Is it that you feel this peace? And so I have learned that it has become this alignment that you create. So whether it's subconsciously or whether it's something that you just feel, like the gut, right? I always like to ask people, where is it in the gut that you feel when something is right versus wrong? And so I help them realize, like, is that your compass, if you will, your moral compass when it comes to, am I really making the right decisions that support the life that I want to create for myself? So it really is about helping them to become curious around where are those feelings landing on them. For some leaders that I've coached before where I ask them like a question around a feeling and they're just like, I'm not really an emotional person, or I don't really, do feelings. I usually become curious around that. So I ask them, okay, so when you've had to make a difficult decision, what helps you? Where do you feel in your body or in your mind that it's the right decision? And then they start to explain it. And through their explanation, then I'm able to realize like, okay, this person thinks that they're solely in their head about a decision, or it's just the overall feeling. Do they feel anxious about the decision? Or do they not feel anxious? So it really is sort of doing this full body scan of, okay, where does it feel good? And if it does feel good, what's happening around you? What are you observing? What are you noticing about it? And so it's through really those questions and then helping individuals to kind of do that own scan of themselves to then get to that next level. So to deepen their own awareness around what is it that they do find joyful? What is it that does make them feel like they're living their truth? When is it that they're feeling that way? And so it's through those different conversations to help them get to that point then in terms of, what is this really about? How can I do it? And it's not this big complex thing of, it's just almost otherworldly. Not necessarily. And so I always try to explain it to people that it really is, it's essential to who you are. It's like the human essence, really. And then tapping into that. And not forgetting that you may be like a super leader, you may hold all these powerful positions, and even an individual who's not maybe a quote unquote leader in terms of, what societal standards would call like the role or the title, right? Outside of that, I always ask people, well, what do you envision? And so that kind of makes me think of Richard Boyatzie's work around intentional change theory and the ideal self and tying all those pieces into it. So the more recent learnings that I've acquired through the MPOD program have really helped me to realize, that's what that is when people are in that state where they're motivated and they're like, now I'm visualizing who the ideal self is, who I really want to be, and then going forward with it and not being fearful of the quote unquote consequences that come with embracing your ideal self, like who you really want to be versus who you think you should be.
Yeah, and I think that conversation and the intentional change theory framing around that conversation is important. It's an important antidote to people, and I suspect you've come across people like this where they'll say something like, on paper, my life should be amazing right now. My career should be amazing right now. I've got a good job at a good company. I really can't complain about my coworkers. I can't complain about my boss. My home life is great. Everything, again, these magical words, these operational words on paper looks and should be good. But And it's not that our intuitions are ever misplaced. Our intuitions are an imperfect guide to personal development, as much wisdom as we can seek from them. But there really is something about like turning inward, kind of to your corporeal self almost, or certainly your psychophysiological self. Looking to the wisdom of your body. Forget about how your life is supposed to roll on paper. How does your life make you feel? And I think, the great insight that we can derive, among many from intentional change theory and Richard's work, is that a lot of people really do get stuck at the real self. The real self, where they weigh up the sort of pros and cons, and kind of like they do the category A and category B, and they're like, well, again, on paper, from a conceptual point of view, there's enough in column A that I really should just be happy with my lot. I really should be satisfied with all the the totality of my circumstances right now. And yet, when you adopt an ideal self approach, you kind of do have this sort of like whole person. You used the term body scan before. You have this sort of like whole person envisioning of how much better it could be. And those conversations, and part of the strength of Richard's work is when people have those conversations with themselves, then they start to feel that flurry of, get up and go that they don't get from the whole on paper, my life should be good analysis. I think the intentional change framework on that front is an important antidote to people who think, well, as long as I'm ticking the right boxes on paper, my life should be good, my career should be good.
Yep, and I also think so with the to-do list, the individuals who are sort of wedded to a list or like to have a list for whether it helps them to feel more balanced or organized. I also have had a lot of interesting conversations with individuals who, again, on paper, everything is looking good. I've done this, I've done that, I've done all these things, and I'm going to do. So it's more of the actions that they keep doing because, again, it's what they're supposed to do. With those particular individuals, or where I've start to ask them more about like, all right, let's deepen the conversation a little bit more. Let's get below the surface, right? So what are those drivers? What are those motivators? What is it that keeps you going and not pausing? Or what is the discomfort around an actual physical pause and then a checking in with yourself? So that's where the feelings piece come up. Like, well, how do you feel at the end of the day when you've done everything? Oh, I feel great because I did everything I was supposed to do. I feel great because my list is done and woohoo, I achieved it. And so having that orientation towards achievement, and then it's saying, well, but what would happen if you didn't do those things? So where are you attaching your value as an individual? Is it purely based on those achievements? And then it's almost like, let's dig a little deeper, right? It's like it's almost like an onion where you're like, okay, let's all these layers that are there, but like what's at the core? And so I love the concept of the core. And it's actually something that I also created around resilience, because I'm also a master certified resilience trainer when I worked with the Air Force. And so when I went through that training with resilience, it made me think about like, it's sort of like the core. And at the core, there's a little bit of compassion, there's optimism, there's renewal or resilience, if you will, and empathy. And so as I started thinking more and more about core and what's core for leaders or people or just individuals in general, and how they strengthen it and what they do to strengthen it, because you're in fitness too, right?
Oh yeah. And we'll get to that. Yeah.
I was going to say, so I might be jumping ahead, but with the concept of core, the thing is, when people say, oh, that struck me at my core was shook, all these things. I always tell them, it's that thing that kind of keeps you balanced, right? It does so much for us, physiologically speaking, when we talk about the core. And a lot of people don't realize that they have all these things that they do on a daily basis that they think don't require a lot of effort, like standing up, sitting down. It's all rooted in the core. And so when I provide that illustration of it, if you think about like an apple and you you can't really cut, like the core is like the toughest part, but that's sort of what encapsulates or holds a whole piece of fruit together essentially. So I tell them, what's at your core? So if you were to strengthen that core, how would you show up differently then? What would you do on a daily basis to shift how it is that you're showing up? And so it really is kind of like, how can we have these more meaningful conversations? So whether it's intentional change theory, like you said, or whether it's something else, whether it's getting out there and doing your daily walks to make sure that you're balanced going into a new day, or the mindset. The mindset is another huge thing too. And I've found that a lot of the conversations that I sometimes have with clients that I coach or just teams that I work with or leaders that I work with, I've learned that a lot of times it's a missed conversation. It's a conversation that hasn't happened yet. And then when it does happen, more recently, like just this week, I met with a team. We did a team building session, but it was really more rooted in helping them. They're a newly formed team. So they were trying to establish roles, expectations, team goals. And at the end, we ended up, they were able to develop a team agreement, but the leaders were both like, this is really positive, the impact, and it's something that's sustainable going forward, because now if we lose a person or gain a person, we actually have something solid to fall back on, and it's fluid. So it's not necessarily, stuck in terms of that's it, that's the only agreement we have as a team, but it's something that's fluid because everyone's input was included. And so it's something that makes me think about there's so much more to it when it comes to the conversations and the power of a conversation. So it can all start with a simple question. And sometimes some people will say, no one's ever asked me that, or I've never even thought about that. And then that's where I feel like, we've struck gold, and just going with that energy and moving it forward.
Yeah, and look, I mean, that's one of the things that never gets old for me as a coach is those moments where, well, people respond with, I literally never thought about it that way. I mean, that to me, I think most coaches would agree, that's sort of a testament to when you've done something right as a coach, that you haven't given prescription, you haven't given counsel, you haven't even given advice. You've just kind of thrown something out there and it's resonated and it's landed. I mean, those can be extremely powerful, generative moments. But I do want to just go back to what you were saying about core, because I think, without wanting to play a semantic game, which I think it's easy to get into sometimes in these conversations, I think the idea of core is a much more powerful and practical framing than something like, say, passion or purpose, which, while I don't doubt their importance, and I don't doubt that they're kind of good North Stars for people to have in some sense, passion and purpose are also a little bit ethereal, a little bit epiphenomenal, a little bit imprecise. And I feel like for some people, the terms where people, they just end up sort of chasing their tails, trying to find their passion or their purpose, when something like finding your core or establishing your core, especially in the kind of like the quite holistic way that you've described it, where there's a, there's a kind of purpose component to it, there's a physiological component to it, it's a kind of all of person centering of oneself. I can't help but feel that that's a much more profitable framing for a lot of people than something like find your passion, find your purpose, which, again, while important, and I think, all contribute to the overall narrative of self, they set people, finding your passion, especially for me, is almost as a wild goose chase. There's a danger of a wild goose chase, dimension to that line of thinking that I think you don't get with something like finding your core. Finding your core, to me, is a much more practicable, kind of exhortation to just like getting down to root causes and a root sense of self. Not thinking, not sort of holding your own feet to the fire to try and find something like lofty and grandiose, which you may get to, but don't make that the priority. Make the priority centering yourself, getting a sense of self, of your values, of everything that keeps you dialed in and calibrated. And from there, finding your passion, finding your purpose is a lot more, again, practicable.
Absolutely. I think as you said, I think passion and purpose can also be misconstrued. Sometimes, I think about the cultural context. So I'm first generation Hispanic American. My family's from El Salvador. And so when I think about different cultures around the world and how is the word passion interpreted? What does that entail when someone asks about your passion? In another culture, it could mean something, well, passion is again sort of this dreamy, unrealistic thing to latch on to because it's just unrealistic. And purpose is something that's so noble and so grandiose, as you said. And I think that's where it can fall completely flat and become this, again, this unrealistic pursuit where people feel like they're going in a circle because they can't quite find it. Or people begin to wonder, am I even good at anything because I don't have this passion, I don't have this drive, I don't have this purpose? So what does that mean for me? And they could maybe be the most amazing artist and they have this amazing, amazing talent, and it could easily be their purpose or a passion that they have. However, because of the way society has conditioned them, or even perhaps their family, again, thinking about cultural expectations and norms, I always think about, well, what language do I need to speak? So in what terms can I put it in? And that's another big thing about audience, right? And the language and the power of words. And I think, like you said, core is something, it's so grounded. We all have a core. So whether we call it, make sure those abdominals are at work or whatever it is that we call it, or how is your balance? Are you feeling balanced today? Are you feeling a little shaky? It kind of goes back to the core. And so I think I was thinking to myself as you were talking about just passion and purpose that, a lot of people, it just doesn't resonate. And I think more so now than ever. I mean, having gone through a pandemic, I think a lot of people are like, passion, perhaps purpose. Purpose is maybe has become more resonant than maybe passion, because we've all been kind of flipped upside down and around and whatnot with this whole pandemic thing. However, I think people are now actually questioning, well, what gives me purpose, but what can strengthen me to make me feel confident in going forward with that purpose and pursuing it. So going back to the concept of core, I think that's where, it's something that can totally resonate for everyone.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I know you have an interest in coaching and consulting, across diverse cultures and in an international space. And I mean, as someone who, I'm born and raised in New Zealand, but I went to grad school in America, now living in Vietnam. I mean, one thing that I noticed with people here in Vietnam is that they see the concept of passion as we would sort of discuss it in the West as a little bit of a kind of Western indulgence, like self-indulgence, but yet at the same time, a concept like merit, which is starting to become, fall out of favor in the West because, people are now, I mean, this is quite a newfangled thing. It's not to say that merit's not important, but there's kind of been this, I've noticed this newfangled sort of movement within sort of org psych and OB that, merit is something that we have over-focused on in the West, perhaps to the detriment and disadvantage of certain people, and I suspect there's some truth to that. But in a society like Vietnam, merit still carries a lot of currency in a way that passion, the way we conceive of it in the West, doesn't. They see passion as a little bit, I mean, especially because, if you're someone in Vietnam, the chances of you being like the unicorn person who comes up with this amazing new startup and goes off into the world and sets $1 billion company in motion. I mean, it's virtually zero for someone in the West. It's really virtually zero for someone here. So the idea of like living out your passion just because that's what you're supposed to do, it's so kind of untethered to the on-the-ground cultural context and reality of life in a country like Vietnam, whereas something like merit is much more appreciable to them. Like, okay, you work hard, you get the rewards. You have this nose-grinding 60-hour week in, week out, you'll get promoted. And we've started to shy away from that kind of thinking in the West, and I think that's for good reason in many respects. But just to your point about how these ideas resonate or don't resonate across cultures, I think core is something that could be quite culturally invariant in some sense. If you get down to sort of a very centered brass tacks sense of self, we all have a core. You know, we all have cultural overlays and, you know, like vagaries of our own culture that get, heaped upon that core. But at the center of it all, we do all have a core. I feel like that's something where there needn't be as much daylight between cultures as perhaps something like passion or merit currently does.
I agree. And it's interesting because, so in the context of like OD work, it's interesting. We would have a lot of conversations around, well, what language is most effective when you say appreciative inquiry in, let's say, an Asian country or a European country or in the States or in Latin America or in Australia or, you know, where, or in Africa. Like, what language do you need to use to connect with the individuals that you're working with? Is it, if you say, today we're going to do an appreciative inquiry, are they going to look at you like, what is that? You know? And so it's so interesting how perhaps if you just do the inquiry and ask the questions without prefacing it with, by the way, we're going to do an appreciative inquiry here, so, you know, brace yourselves. People may just think, what in the world are we doing? What are you dreaming about? Or what did you smoke before you came into the meeting?
Right. Yeah.
So I think, again, it's almost becoming like a polyglot in this space. So whether it's through coaching or consulting, and I think what I've learned in just, you know, having conversations with like you and other individuals who work in different parts of the world, I think what I've been able to determine or learn is that it's so essential to flex in the language and to flex with, you know, well, where can I really connect with this individual before I start having this conversation where they're going to look at me like I am that quote unquote purple unicorn, or like, what is wrong with this person? Like, who is she? What is she talking about? And lose everyone. So I think that if anything, that's probably like a muscle that needs to be developed to then feel confident in being able to go into, let's say, Vietnam, for example, and connect with individuals and understand, well, I can talk about merit and I can talk about, you know, who is working hard. Yeah, absolutely. That person should get the promotion or recognition or, you know, whatever it is that they need to be rewarded because they're a hard worker. So, you know, they have a good work ethic. And so that is, you know, that warrants XYZ. So I think really that's what the biggest thing that I've learned is that you do have to flex a little, because in theory, and I've always been big about, in theory, a lot of things sound great. However, in practice, what is it that we have to do to actually bring it home and help someone so achieve that change or do what they need to do to move forward in their life and build that life that they want?
Yeah, the on the ground, in the trenches realities are often not that clean cut. So yeah, I agree. You do have to flex in a very culturally focused and specified manner in order to get the message through. And I mean, just while you mentioned appreciative inquiry, let's just follow this lead a little while here. I had Ron Fry on the podcast a while back, one of the originators of the appreciative inquiry framework, and I know you mentioned to me that you have an interest in applying appreciative inquiry within the domain of family law and the family courts. So could you tell us a little bit about where your thinking is at in this area and maybe what you're hoping to achieve, potentially researching and working within this space? How are you thinking about applying AI within this particular domain?
So for me, what's actually piqued my interest is, one, personally having gone through a divorce and having two children who are now 15 and 11 and be co-parenting essentially. And having gone through my own, you know, divorce, going through the court systems and entering into an extremely contentious, you know, battle over custody, I realized there has to be a better way in terms of dealing with these sort of family relationships, because it shouldn't be left up to, granted, an imperfect human being who is just trying to make a formal decision within a span of 72 hours or 48 hours after hearing all the facts, and then arriving at some, you know, even though the decision is not final, but there's a final rule and they can always be contested. But what's the point of continuing to go through all these battles, contesting things, if in the end, the parents, all they really want is to be able to be involved in the kids' lives? It shouldn't be prescribed. It shouldn't be, let's adhere to every single thing that's written to the law in terms of how we can spend time together and everything else. So I started to research things around collaborative process. So there is something called collaborative process that is utilized in the states where the parties do not want to litigate. They just want to say, hey, look, this is what we agreed to. This is how we'll split, time with the kids, the breaks and whatnot. And so as I started calling around and speaking to different attorneys in the Virginia area, I learned that not all attorneys practice that, but what it is this combination of a lot of different professionals. So whether they're from the finance world or whether they're from family law or social work, psychologists, just different professionals. They have divorce coaches. They all essentially come together. They're in this network and they try to work with the two parties involved in the divorce, especially when there are children involved and there's custody in question. So they try to sort everything out so that it ends up being a more collaborative process and you avoid this whole litigation thing. So it's almost like an attempt at conflict resolution. However, I still, upon further investigating and just researching things and finding literature, I found this article that was written by a professor up at Fordham University, where I think it was entitled Helping Families to Flourish, something along the lines of flourishing families and helping them to flourish as opposed to devastating families or creating these devastating consequences for families who go through these, highly contentious custody battles and divorces and whatnot. So it made me start to think, well, what if, rather than making it standard to go litigate, or if it's a contested divorce, or if it is, what if they actually adopted principles from Appreciative Inquiry where you realized what's positive, the core, right? But what is good about this family is that both parents want to be as involved as they can be going forward. Granted, the actual relationship between the parents doesn't work. However, for the purposes of the kids, these individuals are willing to do X, Y, Z. So why can't we work within those parameters as opposed to going through a system that systemically speaking and systematically speaking is just not one that's conducive to a winning outcome. And in divorces and custodies, there is no such thing as a winner or a loser, because in the end, it's those kids that are involved that have to suffer the consequences. So they're not going to get to see both parents on a daily basis. They could potentially. However, depending on the parties involved, it's not always about winning or losing. When it comes to kids, I just don't see it as, why is it such and such one custody? Or why should a parent go around saying, well, I have this and I won this and I won that? No, you didn't. It's not about that. It's what can we actually agree to? What is working? What's good and what's right? Let's take that with us and take it forward for the well-being of the kids so that they can continue to thrive, not just survive. It's switching it from, well, let's just survive this whole divorce and get on with our lives. No, we can still thrive as individuals beyond the divorce. The divorce shouldn't be that mark or that stain that says, that's a divorced family over there. Well, these things happen. It should be more like, okay, well, yeah, those things happen. It sucks. However, the kids still have every right to see both parents, to be involved with both parents. It shouldn't be so prescribed. So that's really my thinking. I think I still need to dig a little bit deeper into what that could potentially look like and maybe make more calls and talk to different attorneys about what's being done with collaborative process. However, I kept thinking to myself, there has to be a better way, because I know there are a lot of individuals out there who are probably thinking there just has to be a better way to handle these matters.
Yeah, surely. And I mean, it's interesting because, in an area which is obviously so contentious to the point of being radioactive, adopting a strengths-based framing from the outset, obviously it's going to be more and less difficult for people depending on the exact nature of their divorce, how they divorce, what residual heartache and, emotional conflict is still there and everything. But if you can proceed from the assumption that we can adopt a strengths-based approach to this divorce in so much as we've recognized that we need to get divorced, and therefore by getting divorced, we can be better individuals and better parents separately than we could have been together. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got divorced, right? If we were better together, the strengths-based approach would be to stay together, right? But what we've determined is that it's not working. So rather than looking at that as a weakness, the fact that our marriage, didn't last or imploded or failed or whatever, having the recognition that we need to get divorced can be looked through a strengths-based lens. It can be, okay, the most productive way forward for our family is to recognize that we are going to be better parents, we're going to be better individuals separately, and we're going to play to our own strengths. That to me, just on the face of it, makes so much more sense than the inherently combative and adversarial nature of which we just assume, especially in the United States, without picking on the United States, but it's one of those things where divorce in most parts of the Western world is actually a fairly humdrum process in a lot of respects. It's not to say there's not heartache or misery and suffering that comes along with it. Of course there is, but the actual process of divorce being applied, I mean, certainly in my background in New Zealand, when people go through divorces, it's like picking up insurance or something like that. It's a fairly sort of like linear bureaucratic type process. Whereas, I know certainly in some states in America, in particular, it becomes this just scene that unfolds in a courtroom, and it inflames tensions and animosities that are already just out of control. Well, not out of control, they're already peaked in people, and just sends that animosity into the stratosphere. So just to summarize my general glimpse of this, I think any strengths-based collaborative approach or framing has got to be eons better than the status quo in that respect.
And that's totally that's my contention with it, is that why is it such a cliche? Why continue with the cliche, and also it's this whole soap opera. And granted, it's people, right? And we're complex. Human beings are complex. So it's not to negate the other supports that are there, whether it's working with a therapist or a psychologist or whomever, right? Because as we know, psychology is rooted in the deficit, and let's look at everything that's wrong and try to fix it or whatever. So, and that's where the change of like positive psychology was so refreshing for so many in psychology, because it's like, oh wait, we can actually look at what's good and not negate what's bad, but not solely focus on the deficit or what's, where the deficit lies. So not to minimize the complexities of relationships or divorces. However, I think there was this whole trend, I guess, that Gwyneth Paltrow was truly endorsing around unconscious coupling or whatever. And again, that was just the whole divorcing and separating of a relationship. And so I think it has become sort of, and I can't say, I lived abroad. I lived in England for a few years. And so having lived over there in just different states, you meet so many different people from so many walks of life, and you see how things are handled in different ways. And, how people just realize if something's not working, it's not working, rather than kind of going all in with all the emotions and everything, that's fueling whatever fire and animosity that they have towards each other and conflict. It's just, I kept thinking to myself, I understand there's a judicial system, and I understand there are a lot of reasons why the courts are there. However, in when it comes to kids being involved and parents agreeing that the marriage cannot be saved, but they still want to do their best and do what they can for their kids, where they're in agreement on those things. Again, it could be selective. It's not going to be for everyone, because there are some situations that, perhaps a more aggressive approach has to be taken. However, I just think that if they're already moving towards a collaborative process, then what would be the next step to take it, to elevate it so that it's even better than still having to litigate? What's the next step? How do you elevate that whole process? And that's where I started thinking, well, what if concepts or principles from appreciative inquiry were applied, or just different concepts that could actually support more of focusing on, okay, what is good about both these parties, especially if there hasn't been anything that's like involving the law or abuse or anything like that. Like what's good about these two parties? What can we say? Hey, you all are clearly both crazy about the kids. Let's see what we can figure out, and there's this other way to resolve this conflict as opposed to taking all this time, going through the courts and getting some litigator that wants to go up there and let me go fight this and, whatever. So yeah, I just think it's that next level potentially above from the one step up from the whole collaborative process.
Yeah, and it's certainly a good direction to be aspiring towards. I would just think, again, I would just think that, anything beyond the status quo right now where, again, as we've both alluded to, the cliche is that it has to be so adversarial and so combative that, that to me just seems like if we're resigning ourselves to that, being the status quo of divorce and divorce proceedings, we can't aspire to make it better. And so I'm with you. I mean, you take the approach that you're advocating for, and take it one step beyond mere collaboration towards something as you said, like a level up. I think would be a very positive direction. But just to pivot into another direction, I mentioned at the top of the show, you're a Zumba instructor with almost a decade's worth of experience, and the idea of how physical fitness and positive emotional experience are so fundamentally connected. This is a source of huge interest in my own coaching work. So for yourself, how does being fit and active and involved in Zumba contribute to your own sense of joy and fulfillment? And how do you see others gaining similar joy and fulfillment through physical fitness and activity?
I love it. I was actually out dancing last night. So it's been quite a long day for me. But obviously from my laughter and my smile, I love dance and fitness. So I was an instructor from 2009 to 2018. And so in 2018, I decided, well, let me walk away from it. Nonetheless, I'm still very much into the dance fitness classes and dancing socially every now and then when I can, as well as just finding new ways to keep fit. So I used to do running. I've run like a 10K, 5K, things like that. I haven't done a half marathon. However, the high that you get from a run, like a good run or just a good workout, is you just can't compare it to anything else. I mean, I'm not one who's ever experimented with recreational drugs or anything like that. So I can't speak for that, and people, whatever, that's probably a different high, I'm pretty sure. Nonetheless, in terms of just fitness and movement, but the joy, I just am so, when I watch a ballet dancer or just like a show where there's like ballet dancing or just dancing in general, I connect so deeply with the movement. And sometimes as I'm watching, whether it's like a performance or something, I'm just moved that physically sometimes I find myself starting to like move, and I'm like, oh, what are we doing here? But for me, it's just always been my happy place. So if I were to add to what gets me into that state of flow, definitely music and dance. So if I hear a song, according to my Spotify, gender fluid when it comes to music, or genre fluid, my bad. Genre fluid on the Spotify playlist, because supposedly I think I listened to like 171 genres of music. And so at least according to Spotify and their, data or whatever. So I absolutely love music. I listen to music from just all over the world. My go-to is probably Latin music when it comes to dance. However, house music, if it's good music and I can dance to it, more than likely I'm going to dance to it. And my kids know that about me. I will break into song and dance. And they're just like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, you know me, this is what I do. But I have noticed that overall, for me to feel balanced, to feel ready to either, if I'm excited about like an upcoming meeting or workshop that I'm doing, I will usually listen to music for a good 10, 15 minutes. And I'm like, all right, let me put on my happy music. Let me get into this space. And I'll probably dance for a little bit as well. But it's connecting to the music to me is such it's almost like a spiritual thing. It's like I connect to the music connects to my body. And it's sort of like this, I just kind of go to this other place. And for me, fitness as well. It's not with every class that I take, though, when I'm working out. So I found that with running, I was able to get to that point where a lot of my friends who are runners would say to me, hey, if you've never ever experienced a runner's high, they're like, you'll know it when you experience it. So I would run, not that I was running after the runner's high, is not why I stuck with running, but I did get to the point where I would experience that sort of heightened level of like awareness or something. And it was like this, it's like my mind was completely like just clear, but it just felt so good. And it was after like a run, and I was like, wow, if this is what the runner's high is, I'm like, this is great. I love it. And then that would just energize me. And so overall, it was like, it set the tone for the day, or it helped me to just feel good. The fact that I could physically engage in an activity, so whether it was a long run or teaching a Zumba class, and I would see the students, just the joy that would radiate in their faces from dancing. And I would always tell them, hey, nobody's watching you in here. So you just dance like no one's watching and leave it all, as they say, on the proverbial dance floor. And they would say, okay. And I'm like, and if you got a little more to work with, I'm like, work it, okay? Let me see it jiggle. So that would just get them excited, and they're like, all right. I'm like, you got it, work it. So it just was, I don't know how else to describe it other than just elation. It was absolute like just elation for me. And I'm like, I chase that all the time. So that is sort of like, I need my daily dose of like tonight, there's usually a dance class that I go to in the evenings, but I had such a long day. And then we had also committed to doing this. So I was like, oh no, it's cool. I'm going to catch this class on Saturday. But I'm like, I will be at the next class, to do that. So, but I love to try different, fitness activities. I will say yoga is one that I sometimes struggle with, because not that I can't say so, but I think I haven't quite gotten into the appreciation of just being more in that, very like still kind of in your breathing and all that stuff. But it's one that I'm like, I'll get to it eventually. But overall, fitness to me I don't see fitness as like a to-do. It's more of a lifestyle. So dancing, fitness, it's part of maintaining that lifestyle that I want to maintain, that brings me joy and that brings me that peace and that happiness that I want. What about for you?
Well, for me, I see it as a to-do, but I see it as a get-to-do rather than a have-to-do. So for me, it's something that I actually look forward to. There's a couple of things I would say. One, my own Spotify playlist is not only genre fluid, it's gender fluid as well. So, and for me, the style of, I listen to a wide variety of music as well, but the styles of music that I listen to primarily when I work out, I think are quite in keeping with the way that I work out. So I listen to like a lot of like hardcore punk, thrash metal, gangster rap, stuff like that, stuff where it's just like very male and macho and very testosterone-y. And so then I get it and I go and lift weights and I hit the heavy bag, and I love, so my version of Zumba is kickboxing. I love just, 5-minute rounds on the heavy bag, because for me, frankly, and I'm not ashamed to say this, I kind of get into my like 5-year-old He-Man wannabe mindset, and I'm just like, I beat the shit out of this thing, and I feel so alive as a man because of it and stuff like that. I really do get that pulse running through me, and same with when I lift weights as well. It really. The other thing is I'm a runner, and I love running. I run a lot, and talking about the runner's high, the one time I actually did a full marathon was in Cleveland, when I was in the middle of my PhD, and it was in 2017. I've done plenty of practice runs up to that point, 20, 25, 30 Ks or whatever, then up to the 42K or 26.1 in freedom units for a marathon. I was doing the keto diet leading up to that marathon. So basically I had switched over to a diet which was high fat, extremely low carbohydrates, and I got to a point where I was burning my own body fat for fuel. And so that diet, it's not for everyone, but so I'm not advocating for it, but that particular diet worked very well for me. I got down to 98.2 kilos, which is about, I think that's 215 in freedom units. So that for me is very skinny, because I'm normally 230, 235. And the reason I say all of this, giving all this preamble, is because on the day of the marathon, I had a bunch of sugar packs and a bunch of sugary, Gatorade type drinks and stuff like that. And I had more carbs on the day of that marathon in that 4-hour run than I'd had like in the 4 months leading up to it. And so in terms of runner's high, and I say this as someone who has done every single recreational drug under the M&M rainbow. Like I'm a legit psychonaut, and I make no bones about it. I got plenty of runs on the board on that front. I mean, I worked in the music industry for 10 years, so I had access, put it that way. And even then, though I've sampled from the smorgasbord of recreational highs, the high that I got having carbs in my body, en masse for the first time in so long during a 26-mile run was something else in terms of the high. Like that was the closest I have ever felt to having a superpower. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I ran it in like 4 hours. I wasn't one of these people who was shredding 26 miles in 2 hours or something like that. I did it at a I'm a big guy. I was doing it at a relatively leisurely pace for a marathon, and still, especially when I was coming through, like mile, 24 or 23 or whatever, I was like, legitimately, this is the closest I feel to being a a superhero on top of the world. And so, there's a legitimate high that comes from it. That high, not just that narrow example I've just given, but, the high that I get in general from staying physically fit, it's a huge part of where I derive my happiness and my fulfillment and my joy from. And this is not just, this is for everyone. If this is available to everyone, I almost imagine this quote on a billboard saying something like, you know what? I have tried every single possible method, modality, protocol, program for exercising that there is, and I never found one that worked for me. End quote. And who's that quote from? No one ever. Because, like a lot of people, I think, just They'll go for a run once because they see their neighbors running and they see it on TV and they're like, well, don't fit people run? Or they'll do something like, and this is where I think something like Zumba has been so instrumental in getting people into physical fitness who otherwise wouldn't have, not the only one, like Pilates has been another one, yoga's been another one, which, has brought people, something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu among the martial arts, that's kind of come into vogue, that's got a lot of people interested in exercising and so forth. But the point is, there is something for everyone, and everyone has to do something. It's too important to just basically, shuck it off as, well, you know what, I hate exercising. There's no form of exercise that I can get into that's sustainable. There is something for everyone. You've just got to try different things. Zumba's not going to work for everyone. Kickboxing and lifting weights is not going to work for everyone. It's a very idiosyncratic thing, but you have to move your body. There is a very well scientifically established and validated fundamental intimate connection between how often you move your body and engage in physically exertive activity and your fundamental baseline level of happiness, joy, and fulfillment. I just think that is an incontrovertible observation at this point.
I love it. I love that you've, like you said, under the rainbow of
look, I can't lie on that front, right? I mean, look, I have, and I know you likely in the MPod program, you probably worked a bit with Chris Laszlo.
Yeah.
Him and I had a, I love Chris. He's a really cool guy. And, him and I, despite a couple of very consequential scholarly differences of opinion, which we can maybe talk about another time, him and I had a very, very interesting conversation one time because we're very interested in the idea of consciousness and the study of consciousness. And Chris sort of said, because Chris has written this book, Quantum Leadership, where he talks about consciousness a lot and everything. And he mentioned to me, I think I'm quoting him or paraphrasing him fairly here when he said, I've never touched a recreational drug in my life. And I sort of said to him, well, dude, from a consciousness point of view, you have explored such a tiny amount of what consciousness kind of actually is. And I think we had to sort of agree to disagree on that front. But, point being, I have scoured the corners of my consciousness in seeking, just all what my mind is capable of thinking up.
Right.
Given the right stimulus.
True. No, that is a valid, I guess, yes, you could totally argue that point, from a scholarly standpoint, yes, because I love his work too. He was one of my advisors and I love his work. And so the whole concept of this elevated consciousness and just quantum leadership and how we are all so connected and the way that we can elevate our consciousness around that and the consciousness of others. It's funny because at one point my mind does this. It always goes to the dirty place. And so when someone, and I think it was because it was the one in-person module that we had, and I want to say they either said, how can we elevate our consciousness? And my mind immediately went back to like high school, and I was thinking, well, there's always marijuana, or that's maybe just the start. That's just scratching the surface. There are these other drugs that will take you to another place. So in my mind, I was like, okay, Jeohanna, stop. Refocus. Focus on what you're doing right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
But it's
focus until the drugs themselves will relieve you of that burden.
Right. So that's why I'm like, no, dancing is like a drug to me, I guess. There are so many ways to dance and there's so many forms and styles. It's kind of like music. I guess music for me does take me to this other, it's like a stratosphere. It's like, it's just this whole other world for me, but I love music. And yes, the list is gender fluid as well. On my Spotify, it is gender and genre fluid. But no, I mean, in all seriousness though, like just the whole concept of consciousness is huge for me. And I think that's part of the whole concept of living your ikigai. And that's where, what helps you to tap into that, deeper level of consciousness for yourself as a person so that you can connect with what really brings value to you and where you find that state of peace, alignment, clarity, and purpose, and then your best work comes out or your best self comes out. So it really is sort of a marrying of all these different concepts and activities that then create how someone can create a life around their ikigai to live it.
Absolutely. And look, that's probably a good place as any to start wrapping things up. I just wanted to say in closing, though, congratulations on your recent graduation from the MPod program. Just talking about Chris and all the other great professors you got to work with. It's a fabulous program. I was fortunate enough to coach in that program, as I mentioned at the top of the show. I think I coached with David Cooperrider's class and Melvin's class as well, Melvin Smith's class in the MPod program. So yeah, I mean, they're all great professors. It's a program that really does self-select for people who are especially energized and enthusiastic and optimistic people. I mean, it's right there in the title of the degree, positive organization development. So you're not going to get grumpy pricks like me coming along to the program, for sure. Like you're going to get a certain clade of people who are very enthusiastic and optimistic and energetic, as I said. But congratulations on your graduation from that program. program, and it looks like you've got a lot of really, really cool irons in the fire. So just wishing you all the very, very best with everything that you've got ahead of you, with living your ikigai from strength to strength. It's been wonderful having you along today. I really appreciate you making the time, and happy to have you back on. We could do this again sometime, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much. And I will say Dr. G, because it's been great. And I love that you also are familiar with the program. It truly was transformative. And really, for me, every single professor in the program, I learned so much. And I'm now just starting to learn even more. So for that, I will forever be grateful for the individuals they are, how they challenged me, and how I've grown in the last 15, 16 months, and what's yet to come. So thank you. And I look forward to joining you again.
Yeah, I will absolutely have you back. So Jeohanna, thank you so much for joining me, and take care. All the best. We'll hopefully talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And it got me thinking.